Okay. Okay, with that, welcome commissioners, staff, members of the public. It's 7:02 on my computer. So I'd like to call the February 22nd, 2022 City of Lafayette Planning Commission meeting to order. I'd like to start by reminding everyone that live public comments during tonight's meeting may be submitted via Zoom conferencing. Likewise, tonight's hearing is streaming live on the city's YouTube channel. Both of those for the Zoom conferencing and the YouTube channel links are available on page 1 of tonight's agenda. Also, gentle reminder for members of the commission and members of the public. We have a lot of new meetings coming up right now. There's a lot moving for the housing element. So Gpac is adding a lot of meetings. There's some additional joint city council meetings, and then there's a lot of other committees at the city and commission. So just a reminder to check the city's schedule regularly. Just like I said, there's a lot being added, just make sure. And then likewise for commissioners, when we do receive meeting invites from the city, just kindly RSVP so staff can track who's going to be at a given meeting. With that, we can go to roll call. So kindly affirm your presence when you hear your name. Oh, sorry.
Greg Mason's in the other group right now. He's in the wrong group. If you want to bring him into the commission.
Thank you. We'll give him 1 second.
Thank you for that. And while he's coming in, I will advise all that with respect to meetings, you're welcome to sign up for our e-notifications so that you are affirmatively emailed when a meeting of interest is scheduled. So you can sign up for all public meetings or planning commission or city council or any or all above. It's a la carte and you can choose what you would like and what you would not like. So lovelafayette.org/e-notification.
And Greg, that's for all members of the public. You don't have to be on a commission. Just to...
Correct.
Perfect. Okay. Welcome, Greg Mason. So now we're going to move to roll call. Commissioner Farsan.
Present.
Commissioner Heising.
Present.
Commissioner Maggio.
Present.
Commissioner Mason.
Present.
Commissioner Sturm.
Present.
Vice Chair Lavange.
Present.
And Chair Radnich. I'm here. So everyone's here tonight. Thank you. Tonight's agenda, can I get a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, moved by Commissioner Maggio, second by Commissioner Farsan. Public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to provide public comment on an item not on tonight's agenda or an upcoming agenda. Do we have any members of the public wishing to provide comment?
If you would like to comment, please go ahead and hit the raise hand button on your Zoom screen. We have no callers, so need not use *9, but seeing none.
Okay, thank you. We can move to item 4 on the agenda, consent calendar. We do have 6 items on tonight's consent calendar. Can I get a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Moved by Commissioner Farsan, second by Commissioner Labange. Thank you. And then continued public hearing, item 5 on tonight's calendar. We actually do not have any items for this portion of tonight's agenda, so we can move to item 6, which is new public hearings. So item 6, housing 6A, housing element section 2, goals, policies, and programs. So tonight, staff is looking for Planning Commission's review of section 2 of the housing element and for us to provide feedback on adding, revising, or eliminating draft housing element goals, policies, and programs. And then we'd be directing staff to bring those suggested revisions back to the March 7th meeting. So before Sarah and Renata jump in, I would just like to take a moment to acknowledge the tremendous efforts that staff's consultants, Gpac, and members of the public, by providing public input. Just the huge effort that everyone has put into the draft that is in front of us tonight. So likewise, I would like to remind the commissioners and members of the public that the city is required by law to update the housing elements. So the updates do need to be in accordance with and as directed by the state law. So any comments that anyone could provide tonight, so either from the commission or the public, if we really can focus on suggestions related to adding, revising, or eliminating items that are in the draft we're seeing tonight, that would be appreciated. So with that, I will turn it over to staff. Thank you.
And Greg, if you could allow me to share screen. Oh, go ahead.
I'll enable that, but did we vote on the consent calendar? I think there was a motion, but if we could just go through the vote on that. Sorry
Yes.
that I didn't catch it earlier.
No, that was really good. Thank you. I missed that part.
Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Maggio. Now I'm turning more red. Okay, back to item 4 for a minute. We will take a roll call vote to move the consent calendar. So Commissioner Farsan,
Aye.
Commissioner Heising,
Aye.
Commissioner Maggio,
Aye.
Commissioner Mason,
Aye.
Commissioner Sturm,
Aye.
Vice Chair Labange,
Aye.
and Chair Radnich. Aye. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate the reminder. So with that, now we will move to staff's presentation for housing element section 2.
Everyone can see? Great. Okay, so this evening we're speaking about the goals, policies, and programs of the housing element. We often say GPPs for short, so if I say that, that's what I'm referring to. So we'll talk about sort of the general plan in general, just brief update, brief overview, and then the housing element as well. The housing element timeline, which is quite hairy these days, but we'll get through it. And then the drafting process, so how we came up with the goals, policies, and programs, and then also a little bit more about what those are exactly, goals, policies, and programs. So as Commissioner Radnich or Chair Radnich had mentioned, we are just asking for questions and feedback this evening. We'll ask for you to continue the matter so no decisions are being made this evening. So as you're aware, the general plan is a blueprint of the community's vision for the next 20 years. State law requires that all cities and counties have a current general plan. General plans are more sort of long range, but the housing element runs on an 8-year cycle. So that's why we're working on that one first. Consists of several elements, all of which have individual goals, policies, and programs that help to actually implement the long-term plan. So there are several required elements for a general plan, including land use, transportation, housing, conservation and open space, noise, earth management, and safety. As I mentioned, the housing element does have a state mandated timeline associated with it, which is why we're starting with that element first. There are 3 sections that we've divided the housing element into. The first section being the background data, which both General Plan Advisory Committee and Planning Commission have already reviewed and forwarded recommendation to City Council. We're currently working on the section 2 with this group. General Plan Advisory Committee has provided recommendation to the group, and then we will come back with section 3, which is the land use plan and the opportunity sites shortly. So again, with the housing element, our sort of overall drafting process is, taking information from the public. Gpac is wrestling with those things, providing a recommendation to Planning Commission, and Planning Commission is making a recommendation to City Council, who will make the final determination and forward a draft to the State Department of Housing and Community Development. That first draft is due June 1st, 2022. Then they have a few rounds of sort of, we'll call it completeness review. So if there's any adjustments that need to be made, they'll give us a sort of a punch list, and then we'll have to go back and make some adjustments and then submit it back for final certification at the end of January 2023. So this is the housing element timeline. So on the left-hand side, you can see sort of the color-coded sections. So Gpac is in green, Planning Commission is in yellow, the affirmatively furthering fair housing is in purple, CEQA is in white, and City Council review is in blue. So as I mentioned, Gpac is currently working on the section 3, where we are right now is at section 2 with Planning Commission. We're currently doing the additional outreach for affirmatively furthering fair housing. We are doing some outreach events in mid to late March. Currently, the draft EIR is available. It was published on Friday, February 18th, and the public review period runs through April 4th. This body will be having a public comment session on its March 7th meeting. And there is also a joint session with Planning Commission, General Plan Advisory Committee, and City Council on Monday to review sort of the outline of the findings from the EIR. And then ultimately City Council will review and will submit to HCD. So that's what we're looking at right now. In terms of goals, policies, and programs. So goals are sort of the big picture, general direction setter. Policies are a little bit more specific. And then programs are actually implementation measures of how we're going to reach those goals. So as an example, in the current housing element, we have a goal to facilitate and encourage the diverse housing types and affordable housing units. And one of the policies is to encourage and support second dwelling units. And then one of the programs is reviewing the number of units that have been built and determining if and how we need to amend the zoning ordinance to increase the number of units. So we worked with the General Plan Advisory Committee over several months to establish the goals, policies, and programs. We looked at the existing goals, policies, and programs in the existing housing element. We identified new requirements and laws that took effect. We established new goals with the Gpac first, and then worked through the policies and programs. We also looked through the existing programs and identified some that might be better suited as policies rather than programs, since they weren't super specific in terms of implementation measures, but more policy statements. And then we also established the programs using specific criteria established. And so we asked, does the program belong in the housing element? Is it meeting or furthering one or more of the goals that we worked on together and established together? Does it align with the mission statement? Is it within the purview of the city? Is it financially feasible? Is there public support for it? Can it be accomplished in the 8-year cycle of the housing element? So as I mentioned, each housing element runs on an 8-year cycle, and we're currently in the 6th cycle. And then is it required to be included as a legal matter? Or are there any other overriding considerations or factors that make inclusion of this program critical? In terms of the goals, so there are 10 goals total that Gpac came up with. You'll notice that goals 4 and 5 are currently placeholders. We need to complete the affirmatively furthering fair housing outreach in order to fill in those policies and programs under those 2 goals. And then there are some policies that don't have programs, so not all of them are required to have programs. As I mentioned, they could just be policy statements and general direction setters. And then programs focus again on the implementation of both goals and policies. So again, this evening, we're asking for the Planning Commission to ask questions, provide feedback, and continue the matter to March 7th, at which time we will be looking for a formal direction from the group to make a recommendation to City Council. And with that, I am available for any questions.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any clarifying questions that any members of the commission would like to ask of staff? Just kind of make a reminder. I do see you, Commissioner Heisteen. let's just use this time to focus on questions and clarifying questions. We'll then hear public comment, and then after that, we can get into discussion and opinions. So Commissioner Heising, I saw you had a couple of questions, or you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I was just going to recommend a process by which when we do get to the comment period, I don't have any questions at this point, but when we get to the comment period, I was going to suggest that we take each section at a time, like go through all the ones, because I have a number of questions, and rather than me talk for 10 minutes, we could go through the ones, then the twos, then the threes, and then everyone could kind of chime in. I think that might work
Yeah,
well.
so I think a lot of us were thinking the same. Gpac handled it a very similar way. So what I was thinking we could do tonight was just go goal by goal. So the goal,
Exactly.
the policies and the programs underneath. Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. All right. With that, I don't have any comments. I'll just
Okay.
wait.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Farsan?
So I have questions by what we mean about certain things. So should I do that now or later? So I have several from top to bottom. So mostly from my understanding before I can even provide comment more than anything else.
Yeah, so let me just say, if you think it's something that will help the members of the public, or maybe something else that other people on the commission or the public would like clarified that could help them understand the material better, then I'd say go ahead and ask them. Maybe we could just start from the top and move down though.
Yeah, that works perfectly for me. I just didn't want to take up a bunch of time asking questions when we could do it later, but it's honestly mostly from my understanding more than anything else.
Yeah, so if you don't mind, Commissioner Farsan, I do see Commissioner Sturm has a question. Let me jump to her and then we can go back to your multiple questions. Okay, awesome. Commissioner Sturm.
Thank you, Chair. I have a sort of a general question, and it's a two-part question with sort of several thoughts behind it, but I'll try to keep it to a question. I'm wondering how staff will prioritize the different programs. I can see on the right-hand side of the matrix, there's a time frame given, and I was wondering if that's meant to prioritize or if that's just the result of like, hey, this project is going to take this long, or if we're going to see those things like in a work plan, we'll see it prioritized there. And the second part of my question asking is, as I was thinking, certain items, I mean, obviously all of these different programs have various impacts in terms of like magnitude and types of impact on Lafayette. And my basic understanding of some of these is that some of them might be moving forward in a positive direction, sort of on their own without city intervention, but city intervention could, positively, and like for example, the green building, I think there's a lot of market forces and, all kinds of things that are sort of moving in that direction. So whatever the city can do is helpful, but maybe the city's not a key player in supporting that. But on something else, like affordable housing or the making sure we have, the mixed use development to make sure we're keeping commercial spaces in the downtown, the city might be more influential. So I was just wondering, is staff, are you thinking about it in those terms too, in terms of prioritizing staff's time and the time frame for each item?
Yeah, so we did kind of take a look at each of the programs and try and divvy them up so that we weren't sort of overloading one particular year with a bunch of programs, understanding that it does take staff time to do each of them. And then I think with regard to the second part of your question about sort of the things that may not be super city focused, I think there are some requirements as it relates to encouraging environmental sustainability to be included in the housing element. So that may be why some of those are in there.
Okay, got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Were you done, Commissioner Stone?
I think so. I was just looking at my questions. Another general question was, I did not pull out the previous version of of this. So from my memory, when we see snippets of it, am I correct in understanding that it's sort of, there weren't specific goals necessarily that were added, but there was revisions throughout and additions throughout?
Right, we did start, we didn't totally start from scratch. We kind of took the existing goals and worked with them and then added a few more based on revisions in state law.
Thank you. That's it.
Okay, thank you. Any other commissioners before we go to Commissioner Farson? Okay, Commissioner Farson.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So I'm just going to go down in order now. Some of them are probably very easy to explain. So I just want to make sure. So starting off with 3.1B, the electrification for new residential construction. I'm assuming we're talking about moving away from the use of gas, natural gas, right? That's what we're talking about here?
Correct.
Okay, great. 3.1C, not a big deal. Is that for res and commercial?
I believe the program has primarily been for residential projects in the past, or green building awards. But I'm not totally certain if other commercials, but I think they're eligible.
Not a huge thing. I was just trying to figure out if we need to clarify that or not. So not a huge issue. So thank you. Moving down to 6.1A, conditions of approval for multifamily housing. So there are references to Section 8, and I'm very familiar with this. I'm trying to understand. So California actually passed a law statewide January of 2020 where you cannot discriminate against Section 8 applicants. So what are we doing here that's different than state law? I'm just trying to get a sense of that.
So I don't think it's too much different, actually. It's just making it very clear and apparent to the developers in the conditions of approval.
Okay. So basically, we're reinforcing in writing state law.
Right.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Let's see. I'm just going down here. 6.1D, parking standards for different housing types. Will the study take the BART potential development into account, i.e. we may lose parking spaces? I know that's not for housing, but it's going to affect parking all around. So is that going to be included in the study?
I don't know that we had necessarily anticipated including that in the study, but it's something that we could consider.
Yeah, because I just assume no matter what happens there, parking is going to get shifted one way or the other. So I think it's like include, or, if it happens or if it doesn't happen, it would be good to kind of consider, because I think it's going to be dispersed elsewhere, whether we like it or not, depending on what happens to that site. Let's see. 6.3A, permit ready ADUs. The completion timeframe is 2025. Why can't we do that one sooner? Can't we essentially just crib from other jurisdictions? Doesn't like Danville or Alamo or someone already have these all outlined where we could just crib and move this one forward faster than 2025?
Yeah, so as a frame of reference, the planning period begins in 2023. So we're looking forward, and this completion timeframe is the deadline by which it needs to be achieved. So we can do it earlier than that. We do report annually as part of that Housing Element Annual Progress Report. We give updates to the state on these things. So it can be done before then, but we do, kind of want to be mindful of our staff capacity and the need to get consultants and do the research to find designs that meet our standards and kind of compile that list and publicize it. So it was actually a farther out time frame, but that was something that Gpac actually prioritized and requested be moved up. So it could be done sooner than 2025, but that was just the timeline we set.
Okay, great, thank you, I appreciate that. All right, so just moving down, policy 6.9. And again, when it says large households, is that the reference back down to 7.1C where it defines large households? Is that the same reference?
Correct. Diane can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's a special population that has specific housing needs.
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Thank you. And then policy 6.11, manufactured housing. How's manufactured housing defined?
There are a couple ways that it's defined. Primarily, it's essentially housing that is primarily developed in the sense that it's constructed off-site and then brought on-site. Sort of the traditional understanding of manufactured housing is basically, a single wide mobile home or a double wide mobile home, although those have been now sort of upgraded at this point. And so we have to include that in our discussions in the housing element in terms of what the city can do for manufactured housing.
Thank you. And then moving well down the list. So policy 8.2, the policy is building height, and it says establish development standards for residential building heights that are sensitive to neighborhood context. So that's the policy. But then when I read 8.2A, building height and the revised new objective, that seems to be the opposite. Or am I misreading that? Because it says we care about neighborhood context, but then it says we're just meeting with developers to see what they would like. So what am I missing there?
Well, it's a balance of both, right? So we do have these housing goals that we want to meet, and housing or zoning standards are one of the tools by which we can achieve those housing goals. But we do want to balance that with the neighborhood context. So a building height that's allowed in the downtown core will, we'd like to look and see how it can vary for areas that are adjacent to single family neighborhoods, because that's something that we've seen some friction with in the past. So it's both. So meeting our housing goals and helping the development process, but also trying to keep that Lafayette character and listen to those concerns.
Okay, thank you. And then I think my last question is for policy 10.6, the conversion of illegally converted residential units. So is this they were converted from residential to non-residential, and we're talking about moving them back to residential. Is that the circle?
That's correct.
Okay, cool. That's it. Thank you.
Okay, great questions. Thank you. Any other questions of staff before we open it up for public comment? Commissioner Sturm?
We decided that if we have specific questions on certain programs, we're going to address those when we're commenting.
I think if you have discussion type things that you would like to bring up, let's wait and hold that. If there are questions that are similar to Commissioner Farson's, that's clarifying, that can then help public comment and help form commissioner thoughts moving forward, then I think you should ask them now. But if they're more of just discussion or opinion, let's please wait.
Okay, I'll hold on.
Okay, thank you. So I will turn it over and ask staff if we have any public comment on this item. Go ahead.
Sorry, if you would like to comment, please go ahead and hit the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen. Seeing none.
Okay. We'll give it. Is anyone online?
Yes, we have
Okay.
two attendees, and then
Okay.
if you are watching on YouTube, you're not able to raise your hand. You would need to be on the Zoom, which is on the city calendar and in the agenda.
Okay. Well, thank you. Then we will go ahead and close the public comment period. And now we'll bring it back to the commission for discussion. Anybody wanting to start? Commissioner Heising, thank you.
Yeah, I'll go, just on the section 1.1 A,
Okay,
under responsibility, it shows CPAC through the engineering department, but I also think the circulation committee should be added to CPAC because of, looking at signals and bike and ped connectability and mobility may factor into some of those capital improvements.
I'm just writing this down, thank you. Is that anything, is that enough information for staff by hearing that, or is that something that we need to discuss, or are you guys fine hearing that and then moving to the next?
Yeah, I think we would just want to make sure that if there are any objections from the group that you all can talk about it, but otherwise, as you're speaking, we are taking notes.
Okay. I had not thought of that. This item has come in front of Gpac a couple times. I think that is a fair suggestion. Are there any oppositions to that suggestion? Okay. Is there anything else? So we will go goal by goal. So the goals, the goal, policy, and program for anything under goal 1, which is develop infrastructure through funding mechanisms that support the demands of current and future residents, housing, commercial, and retail development. Anything else from goal 1? Okay, seeing head shaking no, we can move to goal 2. So for people who are following along, I'm looking on my other screen here in the staff report. The draft is included at the end of the staff report. So we're now moving down to page 2 of the draft, which is PDF page 5. Goal 2, promote a vibrant commercial and cultural downtown area that meets the needs of residents and visitors and encourage a mix of retail, commercial, residential building through zoning. Are there any commissioner discussion items that you'd like to bring up for goals, policies, and programs here? Commissioner Heising?
Yeah, thanks. Just my only comment, policy 2.2, the sentence got truncated. So it stops with and. So I think something just got cut off. That was it on that one.
Okay. Commissioner Sturm?
I had a question for staff on program 2.1B. When it talks about the city conducting a study, I was wondering is the study primarily focused on the buildability of mixed use and how it would impact other things that the city is trying to control and plan for? Or is it like the financial feasibility and thus the desirability of Lafayette from a developer's perspective?
It's a little bit of both. So the original intention was to get a deeper understanding of how the potential to require ground floor commercial or other more commercial as a mix in new development might have on economic feasibility of a project. But then through our discussions with Gpac, they broadened kind of the scope of that. They wanted to understand how that would affect other businesses or the kinds of businesses here. And then, beyond that too, how people are moving around and getting around. So how are people commuting into those businesses, getting to work? Are they taking BART? Are they driving? What impacts for parking on that? So predominantly on project feasibility, but hopefully also assessing some of those externalities.
Do we, I don't know what would be the downtown specific plan or downtown design guidelines. Do we already have in those documents the goal of having retail on the ground floor along Mount Diablo?
Yes, so in the downtown specific plan, it does identify in the districts where ground floor retail and kind of those window front facades are sought after.
So is there anything from keeping us from, because that's already something that we've thought about and identified, is there anything in keeping us from requiring that?
There's nothing keeping us from requiring it, but we do understand that rental rates are generally, especially in this current moment, generally housing is more of a long-term revenue than retail or even office space right now, just because things are in such flux and moving more online. And so we could, work towards putting that standard in place, but we always want to be kind of thoughtful of the long-term implications of, putting in some sort of percentage requirement for new commercial, and make sure that we're not prohibiting development by requiring that in our downtown.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've talked about this before. How would you go about requiring it if you did? I mean, well, this is a bigger discussion. My other concern, well, I think when this is looked at, and I don't know if it really itemized this, but the one thing that we've seen on projects is it's undesirable to have residential on the ground floor in Mount Diablo. We're oftentimes worried about how windows will look, kinds of activity, privacy, and things like that. Anyway, so that should be part of that. But then I also wanted to know if the completion timeframe is 2026, and to me, if we're seeing a trend of continuing development like we've seen the last few years, I mean, I don't know what the turnover is, but my guess is that once sites are redeveloped or developed for the first time, it's going to be, 15, 20 years before provisions are made. So I was wondering, is this something that we could move up the time frame on?
We can certainly look at it, but again, we do want to be mindful of kind of the pacing of over the years. So this is not something that we'd be doing in-house, and so we'd have to identify a consultant, work with them to get that study conducted, and work on that. But we can kind of look at the moving it up. Do you have a year that would be you would?
Well, I just think, I mean,
prefer?
we've seen so many density bonus projects, and I feel like all of the projects we've seen almost all of them have been 100% residential. And they've been in areas where mixed use might be a good thing. So it just seems like and I don't know if I'm a very detail oriented planning type of person. So I definitely see the value in thinking things through and I know for some processes, the studies are required. So I don't know. So that said, I don't know if there's a different way to approach some of these larger, like more efficient way to approach some of these things without I don't know what this study would entail, but I don't have a number other than I just think that, if I don't know, how many large projects have we had on a yearly basis in the last 3 years?
I'd estimate 2.
2, okay. I mean, it feels like some of our major sites downtown have been developed, and it feels like with the new housing bills being passed, that we're going to continue to. I mean, who knows what's going to happen with the economy, but there's a good chance that it's going to continue, and then we may lose opportunities for mixed use along Mount Diablo and adjacent to it if we don't figure out a way to promote that with our program.
In the core area, it is a requirement that non-residential be on the ground floor. And so, lost my train of thought, but that in the core area, that's the case.
And it's a requirement. How are we requiring it? Is it in the zoning code for that?
Yes.
Okay. So I don't know, maybe as like a first step, identifying what the downside of that would be in other zoning districts. Because it seems like there's definite, we've already identified a downside to having housing on the ground floor along Mount Diablo and other sections of the downtown. So we know that's, we know that's already an issue. So maybe identifying the downside of having commercial. Maybe a phased approach like we did with the downtown objective standards of some of these things. And I know you guys have been thinking about this for months and months and years, and I'm just looking at your product that encompasses all of that work and making surface comments. But yeah, my main concern was the timeline for that. I feel like it's something that we hear a lot of the public comment on, and it's something that seems time sensitive.
We can definitely take a look at moving it up.
Can I just ask a follow-up to that? So the last sentence on item 21B says this program will need to be coordinated with the land use element. Does that mean that, so when is the land use element coming up? Right now we're doing housing. So when is land use? Is that also kind of what's driving the completion timeframe?
So,
Okay.
yeah, go ahead. No, please.
I was just gonna say, we anticipate doing land use and circulation just after housing element.
Okay. Okay.
And we too would like to get it done sooner than later, but we also are trying to have realistic and completion date, but we will absolutely work towards getting it done sooner.
Great. Commissioner or Vice Chair Labange.
My comments on the same thread and in agreement. I just wanted to point out a couple thoughts. If we had more control early, so let's say we took from the core and we went farther out and said you had to have ground floor retail. If we did that, then that would get priced into the land eventually, just the way, and from my perspective, economics work. A developer can only go so high with, whatever variances, bonuses, or whatever they get. And so if they have to put retail on the ground floor, and I've talked to a number of developers, and they typically don't put much on the pro forma because it's been troubled at times. So they have to, the rest of the development has to cover it. But if we did that, then we could control it a little better. And here's the part that I don't know exactly how to do it, but my thought is, certainly the core, but we might find in 2 years, we don't know where things are going to go, that we want more of this beyond the core. So it would give us a little more control. And if we realized that, no, we don't need it, we would have a little bit of subjectivity on it. I know that's a little counter to what we're trying to do with having objective standards. But I just want to put that I think there is some importance to preserving the ability to say we need more by doing it early, so developers can proactively plan for it by pro-forming and figuring out what the land is valued to them. And, because it will flow down to the value of the land if you can't put residential on that bottom floor. And so when we talk about feasibility, for developers, that's a little bit of a misnomer, because if they know they cannot develop that bottom floor, then that delta of cost really comes out of the land, or it doesn't develop. So I just want to make sure we don't always get behind the developer that, oh, they can't afford that, so we have to give them everything. Not true. If you say you can only go one story, they're only going to be able to pay so much for the land, and then that land is worth that. It's worth the highest and best use that can be built there. So I'm in support of having a little more control here. And so I just want to provide that feedback. So that kind of goes to the time frame issue that Commissioner Stern was mentioning, because if we let this go too far, those, over the next 4 years, if 2 or 3 or 4 big projects come through, we might miss that opportunity if we don't have the control of it. That's my comment.
Okay, any other comments on that item before I share my thought on that item? Okay, I definitely hear what my fellow commissioners are saying. One, I kind of have an opposite thought is I do agree with in the downtown core of having residential on the bottom. It was actually, or, avoiding residential on the bottom. It's actually the reason why I personally voted no on the Brown Avenue development, the one on Brown and Mount Diablo. I couldn't make that finding. One thing that did come up in a Gpac presentation was linked back to the kind of general type of development that tends to go on ground floor with residential above. And it's oftentimes is left vacant or maybe isn't providing the types of uses that we would always choose or prefer to see. So just something to keep in mind. I do really support the idea of the study, obviously. And so I think that is something that will come out of the study. And then maybe we decide, or maybe there could be a portion of the study, like others have suggested, that then looks at potentially stepping it out. But I'm really hesitant to automatically step out the boundary where this is 100% required, because we don't know. We don't want to dig ourselves into a hole that actually isn't going to be helping the city, that could potentially have vacant space. And then if a developer still wants to build their 30 units and it's density bonus, they're now going up, just say, an extra story to compensate for that commercial story. So something to think about that I'm sure the study will be helpful for. Does that give staff enough thoughts on this item? Commissioner Sturm?
I have a question. Would we have had housing projects in the past that cannot meet their parking requirement on site, and they make that up by providing for parking elsewhere on another lot? How does that work? I was just wondering if that kind of concept could be applied to this issue.
We have definitely had that for commercial, but I don't know that we have had it for residential, where the parking is provided off-site.
And is it usually an adjacent site or elsewhere in town?
I think the code requires it to be within 500 feet, if I'm recalling correctly. So one example is the Whole Foods parking lot that's at the corner, or at the Cloverleaf or freeway on-ramp, off-ramp. That is a separate parcel further from the Whole Foods.
Oh, right. Okay. I was just thinking that another way to approach this, and maybe it's already being done, is to figure out what percentage of housing to retail is ideal to maintain the character of Lafayette that's described in all of our planning documents. And then maybe there's some way to, if it's not an ideal place for mixed use on the ground floor, there's some way to have that developer contribute to a multi-level commercial building somewhere else. I don't know. As I've thought about, I remember the time when this came up was with a project that was completely, with doctor's offices and other commercial spaces. And
Are you thinking of like an in lieu fee? Like if they, so we require it, but then if they don't provide it, they pay a fee instead? Is that?
Yeah, potentially. I don't know exactly the mechanism of how that would work, but maybe sort of doing what you're doing here, thinking backwards from the goal. Maybe we need to establish the goal of the percentage. I don't know. Just seeing all of these density bonus 100% housing projects come through, and feeling like we're, there's a lot of residential development in Lafayette, it feels like, and then more housing bills continue to be passed. And I think, I don't know, it feels like there's a risk of us becoming a bedroom community, especially if some sites that are, 100% or mostly commercial are getting replaced with 100% residential.
Certainly, I think I think it'll be made clear that the intent of the study is really to identify ways to preserve commercial. And so even if we find that this particular way won't be the best way to do that, there may be other alternative recommendations coming from the study.
Do you think it's reasonable to make the goal more specific, like with a percentage of commercial to residential, or?
I think that's a bit detailed since we don't really know yet, what that means or looks like. So I think that would also come out of the study.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, moving on to goal number 3 and the policies and programs associated with goal 3. Goal 3 is promote environmental responsibility, long-term sustainability, and adaptability in residential development and related infrastructure to minimize impacts to global climate change. Any discussion items? Commissioner Maggio?
Yeah, I have a couple here. First of all, many cities have already converted to electricity only, and they've outlawed the use of adding new gas appliances. And my concern with that is, in the last several years, particularly with the increase of fires, our electricity has not been so reliable. And just in my particular neighborhood, every time we have either a planned or an emergency outage, all of my neighbors turn on their generators that are powered by fossil fuel. So if in fact we are moving to require all electricity in new construction, I think we should also require solar and battery backup so that when the power does go out, the residents have a sustainable way of maintaining power rather than reverting to something probably even worse than natural gas. So it's just something to keep in mind, because a lot of people are putting in these generators right now because the batteries are expensive and they don't have solar. So that gets me to the next point. When we're looking at building standards, so far in the past, when people have built green homes, the incentive to do so really hasn't been there. It's just sort of their pride of accomplishment. And, they may get an award or a certificate, but there's really no financial or efficiency goals there to build green. And therefore, for a developer, they're really not so concerned with winning an award. They're really looking at how can they build something as efficiently as possible and make the biggest profit. So this is where we need to look, I think, with green building in the future. Now, I understand for these particular goals, we have a tight deadline and we want to be sure that we achieve what is required here. But I'd like to see the city separately become a leader rather than just look and see what everyone else has done. I think we have the ability here we have Sustainable Lafayette, we have a city committee, and we have some other resources that we could pool together and provide some real teaching tools for people who are interested in building green. Even now, and green building has been around for 20 years now. Even now, when someone wants to build green, they have to kind of educate themselves unless they're going to take a course, which they're probably not going to do. And I think there's a lot of ways we can take the LEAD program, the Build It Green program, and adopt a program for Lafayette that makes sense for us, just taking the lowest hanging fruit out and providing some education for the public on how they can really make a huge impact in their building envelope in terms of water and energy efficiency, air quality, the most important things to think about, incorporate them with their architect and their builder. So I think as a city, we can do a lot more to support people when they hit the planning counter, even if it's saying, here's some resources that you can log on to, here's some papers, here's a plan we have for the city. So it's something for us to, I think about and keep in mind, not so much to incorporate here, but we're talking about programs for energy conservation that we can have for the program. I think it needs to be more than an Earth Day event. I think it needs to be institutionalized. When someone hits the counter with a plan, we're handing them a direction that they can go in to build green. So that's my comments on that.
Thank you. Commissioner Mason, then Vice Chair Labange, and then Commissioner Parson.
I just have some basic nuts and bolts type questions about, we'll start with natural gas. You know, everybody talks about, you know, natural gas appliances, but what I'm seeing is one of the bigger pushes is that instant hot water, which generally requires an upgrade of your natural gas. And then how would you handle somebody that just essentially scrapes a house down, builds another one, already has gas service? So that's kind of like my interest there. The other thing I want, if we're going to talk about natural gas, I'd also like to deal with, you know, propane. Propane is considered green, so I have no trouble with propane per se. But one of the things that came out in the Paradise fires is all these propane tanks caught fire and exploded. And that was a tremendous fire hazard. And we do have fire hazards here. And then while I'm for solar, I think we should have, I'd like to keep some flexibility in there, because since Lafayette is fairly heavily wooded and with the topography, there are some houses such as ours where solar just never will pencil out. We just don't have enough sun. So those are some of my, I don't have feelings one way or the other, but those are some of the things I'd like looked at. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Labange.
It's kind of following Commissioner Maggio's good ideas in my perspective. So the gas one, I did just read the other day about, and I tried to Google it, I think it was on NPR or Wall Street Journal, about gas stoves, how much they actually leak, just your average gas stove, and being a greenhouse gas. But that's pretty far out of my lane of understanding, because when Commissioner Mason brought up the hot water tank, or the tankless heaters, I think that goes to the green building of, just in time. So they're kind of conflicted there. So I'll let that, whoever knows that better. But on the green building incentives, again, with what Commissioner Maggio was saying, I think unless we add some incentive that's worth something, it's just greenwashing. So added density, reduce fees or something, and why don't we figure out what we want and then incentivize people to do it? And that's in my opinion how you get them to do it. So if we want something, let's give a bonus for getting it, and make the bonus something we're willing to give because we got what we want, versus just awards and plaques and stuff like that. That's it.
Okay, thank you. I think it was Commissioner Heising and then Commissioner Sturm. Oh wait, sorry, was it Heising? Okay, it was for people shifted on my screen. Commissioner Parson and then Commissioner Sturm.
Thank you. So quick, so somebody can correct me if I'm wrong on this issue. Isn't Contra Costa County law taking effect June 1 of this year, where there is electrification for new residential building? So is this actually anything? Again, I'm confused. We're in Contra Costa County, so doesn't that already take effect June 1 of this year? Or am I missing something?
The County Board of Supervisors approved an ordinance for electrification, requiring electrification for new residential construction in unincorporated Contra Costa County.
Okay, got it.
So it would not apply to us. We normally adopt the California building and residential codes, which don't yet require that, but the county's requirements for unincorporated areas would not apply to Lafayette.
Okay, perfect. That's helpful. And then the only other comment I make on top of what Vice Chair Labange said, yes, I agree that there's a bit of greenwashing and you want real incentives, but I will say this: a lot of companies like the greenwashing. They like to have the award to show off that they did X, Y, and Z, or somebody's commercial property has done that. So I do think some people will like that benefit, but I think financial benefits are obviously always going to win that battle. But I do think there are companies and developers, et cetera, who tout their greenness. So I do think that will get some benefit.
Thank you. Commissioner Sturm.
I had a related idea, and it may not be something that we want to add here, and it may not it may not be an incentive. But I was, when I read the tail end of program 3.1.c, I was thinking that more than the city providing a plaque, what would be more valuable to the community and potentially more desirable to a homeowner or a developer might be to include the project in a green, like a open house or a tour. I was thinking about the kitchen and garden tours that happen in town, and it would be really nice to have maybe a single family home tour and then potentially a downtown, multifamily residential tour. And I don't know, I can't remember if Sustainable Lafayette has ever done anything like that. I know there's, the Earth Day and the Art and Wine Festival often have booths that are related to green building, but it'd be nice to, like we got all solar and batteries and figured out how to do that and affordably, and it'd be great if people that have figured out those different things for their single family homes had a way to share through some kind of venue like a tour. And it might be something that the city wants to promote with a partner.
Okay. Thank you. Any other comments on goal 3 before we do goal 4? Okay, 4 and 5 are on hold. They'll be drafted following the affirmatively furthering fair housing analysis. So moving on to goal 6. For people following, PDF page 7 of 13. It's draft page 4. Goal 6, promote the expansion of the city's housing inventory to accommodate a variety of housing types that are attractive and affordable to potential renters and home buyers at a wide range of income levels. Any discussion items for goal 6, policies and programs? Commissioner Heising?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I've got a number of these, so I'll just rip through them here. So 6.1a, number 2, we're proposing to defer development fees to certificate of occupancy for projects including affordable housing. I think we should quantify that. If the developer is building a certain amount of affordable housing, they can defer their fees. But if they're building like one unit, a really small percentage, it's just more of an incentive unless we're trying to incentivize just 1%. I mean, if we're thinking we're getting a good deal, getting 1%, and we'll let them defer their fees, but I would just quantify that percentage of housing, whether it's 15 or some identifiable amount. And then 6.2, policy 6.2, it was truncated again. It got cut off. Retention of such units should something. 6.2c, condo conversions. I have a little bit of concern there about a property owner. I guess I'm wondering what it means by consider amendments to condo conversion regulations. If there is a project built and it's converted to condos later, I wouldn't want to somehow prohibit the property owner from making changes to their property. So I guess I should ask this earlier in the question period. What is considered amendments to condo conversion regulations? What does that look like?
So there, I think it's within SB 330. There's kind of anti-displacement clauses within that regulation that will require a unit to be offered to tenants who are currently in the property, if it's being redeveloped and there's new units being built, or if it's being converted for sale. And so our condo conversion ordinance was, I think, originally put in place in the 1980s and has not been updated since. And so we want to make sure that there's clear and accurate regulations to guide that process, and make sure that we're not actively displacing anybody through our regulations.
Okay, so I guess what I would look for is some sort of balance there, where there's the ability for the owner to have the flexibility to do what they want with their property, yet not purposely displacing people and reversing the benefits that were created when developing that type of housing to start with. Just to consider that when looking at those amendments. And then policy 6.4, available funding sources. My thought is there to go even further in that policy and maybe say something about investing in a grant writer or training staff internally to look for those funding sources, because that's a real benefit when there's a defined resource on staff or a consultant that has that experience. It takes a certain knack. I've seen some really horribly written grants that have no chance getting any funding, and then I've seen really well written grants. So if there's a way to beef that policy up, just to add that component, and then possibly combine with policy 6.9, because they're pretty close on finding available funding sources, while 6.9 is geared more towards seniors and large households. I don't know if those two could be combined, or we specifically want to keep them separate. And then my last comment on goal 6 is 6.11 manufacturers homes. I'm wondering if we can limit the pre-manufactured component to perhaps ADUs, because I don't know. I mean, I know manufactured homes look better than they did in the 70s, but I personally wouldn't want to drive around town and see a bunch of manufactured homes in these single family lots. So I'm wondering if it's more appropriate that they be for an ADU. I could see a homeowner wanting to put an ADU in their backyard, and the city has a list of pre-approved manufactured ADUs that could be installed or built or brought in rather quickly. But from the perspective of the charm in our city and the architecture and how the curb appeal in our neighborhoods, I wouldn't personally really want to see manufactured homes. So those are my comments on goal 6.
So would you feel the same about manufactured homes if they are already subject to design review guidelines? Like if the product proposal, if the installation of these would still subject to design review?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, if it went through a process where it was made to not look like a manufactured home, in my mind, I envision a manufactured home not looking that great. But if there was a way design review could make them more appealing, then yeah, that might work.
Well, and a follow-up to that, and then I do see hands, a follow-up to that is, I think, a question I was asked earlier of the definition of manufactured home. Is that the same as prefab? Or the same as comics box homes that people are doing? We have seen designs presented in front of us that are ultra modern looking that were not prefab homes, but some prefab homes that you do see, on the internet scrolling look like some of the designs we have seen in front of us. So maybe clarification of what exactly the manufactured housing is, and then a set of review guidelines. I see Commissioner Farzan has his hand up, Commissioner Sturm, and then Commissioner Mason.
Thank you. I'll start off with the last one and then move up. So can we actually change that policy on manufactured homes? I thought it was a requirement that it has to be included. So that was the overarching question that I had. Is it definitionally we can change it, but as I understand it, we have to include that component. Am I wrong about that?
That's correct. We do need to include it.
And so then can we change the definition as Commissioner Heising was saying, or is manufactured home defined elsewhere by the state and we have to use that definition? I'm just trying to find what the baseline is.
It's defined by the state, and we can get that information for you. And the
we have to
requirement is
include
to
it.
allow manufactured housing in the community.
Yep. Thank you. I'm going to go back to the top and not like really might not even be comments, it might still be questions, but for 6.1a, I guess subsection 3, provide documentation of tenant first right of refusal per SB 330. Are we talking about that gets handed to the developer? Is that what the point is there? So they know that they have to offer it, just documentation?
They have to provide documentation to the city that they offered first right of refusal to the tenants.
Right. Okay. So I guess I would, that's what I was thinking. So I think we have to shift the language, because the way I read this is they come to the city and the city gives it to the developer and not the other way around. Does that make sense? So I think just a little tweak of the language, and I'm happy to send you a tweak for the language. Just let me know. I just want to make sure what we're getting at there. So thank you. For 6.1D, it's the same comment I made before. I think we should, whenever we do the study on parking, again, I'll leave it to the experts, but I think the BART parking lot potential issues should be included in that. Again, I'll leave it to the experts on how that should be, but I think it's important to use it. Let's see. And then my last comment is for 6.1E, diversity of housing types. I generally get this, but can you just give me a 30,000-foot view of what we're trying to do here? And don't take any offense to this. It sounds a little wishy-washy, and that might be the point, but I'm just trying to get at what the goal of this one is.
Sorry, which portion?
6.1E, diversity of housing types. Just the generally, what's the 30,000-foot view of what we're trying to do with this one?
Sure. So on, I think it was February 1st, we had a presentation from a Gpac member, Mike Kim, who's a developer, which was very helpful in breaking down the kind of different building typologies and the associated costs for development. Mm-hmm. And so the idea behind this program is that different kinds of housing cost more to create, and therefore pass on those costs to the ultimate buyer or renter. And so one of the key things in expanding housing access and housing affordability is housing choice. So an ADU, for example, is going to be cheaper than like a large 2,500 square foot townhome versus a large single family home or any single family home. And so the idea behind this is to look at our zoning standards and understand if we're preempting any of those missing middle types of housing through our development standards. So we want to make sure we're not precluding any options being built.
Got it. So a different multitude of choices for somebody to build on, and that's what we're looking towards, making sure that it isn't just giant house versus multifamily, just what the accordion is in the middle.
Right, and how we're facilitating that, or if we're not facilitating, or if we're not allowing it, basically.
Got it. And then and with this, again, is this a study? Is this something like, who would be looking at this? Is it core staff with all the million other things that you have to do? Is this something else that gets added to that?
Yes, so the intention right now is to be staff. It could be a contract planner, depending. But it would be the planning department's responsibility to figure out who's doing it.
Okay,
Make
great.
sure it's being done right.
Got it, great. And then I have one final, I think, comment, something that Commissioner Heising suggested about an internal grant writer. If we can't get funding for that, there are a ton of external consultants who we could access to do grant writing for us at a fairly good price too. So that's another potential. If we can't internal, we could do it externally to try to do that, and they know specifically where to look. So just a suggestion on that front. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Sturm, I think you wanted to add comment. Oh, we're gonna actually, can I hold for 1 sec? I see Diana, you have your hand raised. Is that intentional? Maybe not. Okay, I'm gonna pretend like it was not intentional, but if it is, just feel free to raise it again. Commissioner Sturm.
Okay. I was just gonna ask a question about the manufactured homes. I think Diana answered it and clarifying that it means it's sort of an entire home that's manufactured, not like the modular houses or the prefabricated houses that we've seen. So that cleared that up. And I think the homes that are modular or prefabricated, it essentially just streamlines things on the design end. But in terms of the city's approach, they have to go through the building department and all that sort of thing. So my question is about program 6.1C. And I'm wondering, it seems to me that projects of fewer than 7 units would essentially be a duplex or a fourplex. I feel like most multifamily housing sort of falls above that, beyond a duplex or a fourplex. And I'm wondering if this, maybe you guys talked about this in the Gpac meetings. I'm wondering if this sort of essentially just levies a fee on developers of duplexes and fourplexes, which then may be countered to, 6.1E or any other initiatives that we would use to try to make sure that we have that variety of housing types.
Yes, so under 7-unit projects is currently not subject to building any units under the inclusionary housing ordinance. They would only be subject to fees, partial fees, essentially, a pro rata share. And the fee study is upcoming in the next fiscal year.
So this isn't a new policy?
I can't say that it's not new, but we are anticipating working on it in the next fiscal year.
So we don't currently have any in lieu fees for inclusionary housing units. And our city is actually unique in that we don't have that option. So we require the units to be built. But this program would be a way for us to capture some value towards supporting affordable housing development elsewhere in the city, since projects under 7 units don't trigger inclusionary housing requirements. But I definitely hear your point in that, that is a potential burden put on that missing middle housing stock.
Okay, thanks. And then I didn't see, so it's sort of the similar approach, I guess, to the mixed use development. And obviously we can't raise the requirement of affordable housing because that does create issues for developability. But I see that these other programs are essentially trying to capture funds and promote more affordable housing in a gentler way than just straight up regulation. But I was wondering if there's a way to promote getting the percentages that meeting our goals. It seems like every year we end up exceeding our moderate income goal, and then the low and very low, we're usually not. Typically, I think we're not very close. What did you guys? I don't see anything here. Is there any way that we can address that issue?
I think Diana has previously given a strong explanation of why the inclusionary housing percentage is set where it is. Maybe they can provide some more background.
Yeah, the inclusionary requirement is set because at 15%, because that's what the state will allow without additional analysis. Beyond 15% in inclusionary, we have to basically describe it as a constraint to development. And so when you try to do something like 20%, then we would have to go through a big analysis in order to tell the state why 20% is not as objectionable. It is not objectionable as compared to 15%. And so that's an analysis that requires a lot of additional outside consultants and financial feasibility studies that is very expensive for the city to do. So the 15% is accepted by the state, and that's what we've used at this point.
I think I understand that. I was actually asking if there's a way that we can promote meeting our affordability goals within that 15%.
We already do. What do you mean? I'm not sure I understand what you mean. We already do. It's affordability at less than 80% of median income for those units. We see it a lot of times in the staff report. There's a table that says we're looking for a certain number of very low income housing, right.
Low income housing. But of course, developers always want to build the moderately affordable
right.
housing.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. They have a choice. Yeah.
Right. So is there, I don't know, in the Gpac's discussion and staff's discussion, have you?
I don't think the Gpac has had a discussion specifically about the inclusionary development, inclusionary unit requirement. Correct me if I'm wrong, Sarah or Renata, but I don't think they've talked about that.
No, I think the state has some incentive within the density bonus regulations.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So the deeper the affordability, the more density you can get. So that
right.
was sort of their intention to try and encourage and incentivize that.
Yeah.
But there isn't anything.
Right.
And I think the city's ordinance has topped out at the maximum that we can require without this huge additional burden to prove out that it's not an impediment to housing production, which is kind of at odds with the whole point of inclusionary, is to build those affordable units, but at the same time, the state says, but that's an impediment on building housing. And so there's it's challenging. So all of the limits that the city has set are the maximum that are permissible by state law, and the flexibility. And so there is the developer has the right to choose which affordability level, and then there's a commensurate density percentage of density increase. But it's partly a function of the project size. And the smaller the project, the less carrying capacity they have to do deep levels of affordability and amortize that over the market rate. So I guess the takeaway is we have set the limits as high as possible within the law.
Mm-hmm. When what was it? Which housing law affected the terraces, and the city was still
The Housing Accountability Act was a factor in the terraces approval.
And was that because we hadn't met our overall affordable housing goals, or the different affordability levels?
I think that was one of the findings, is that we haven't met our RENA.
Correct.
It was a total, it wasn't the affordability levels. Because I remember that chart in the staff report. I was just, my question is, if we're not meeting our affordability level goals, does that work against us in some, like with some housing bills?
But potentially, but the state has set such incredibly high numbers for RENA that we are like the majority of cities in that we're not meeting those very high allocations. I mean, there are very, very, very few cities that have in the last 2 cycles.
Okay. And I guess my last question is, I know we have, the housing, the parking ordinance, revamping of that provides incentives for doing certain desirable things in the developments. Is it worthwhile for us to think about like incentives for selecting like the lower affordability levels for affordable housing?
Could be something.
I don't know, like a decrease in parking, or I don't know what that would be, but like some other kinds of incentives that the city could leverage to get, the very, very low and low.
It is absolutely something that we could consider. I think at a staff level, we've looked at kind of the order of magnitude numbers associated with constructing below market rate units and what they go for, and the delta is very, very significant, and the city is dealing with a very small amounts of potential incentive unless it were like another story or another 10% density bonus. I mean, some significant incentives would need to be considered. If we waived some fees, it wouldn't be nothing, but it wouldn't necessarily move the needle significantly on those level of affordability. But we'll revisit this again as we talk to builders and about their projects, their pro formas and construction costs. We're we have these ongoing conversations around the economics of building and our regulations and those of other entities, and the struggles they deal with, and PG&E comes up every time. So.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I know every time we get a density bonus project through and they're providing affordable units, but it's more moderately affordable and we don't have any of the lower tiers, it always sort of breaks my heart. Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Mason, I think you had your hand up a while ago.
Yes, thank you. I've got one is I'd like to follow up on a comment by Commissioner Heising about deferring fees till certificate of occupancy. I'm all for that. I just want to make sure we don't fall into something like City of Fremont where large project goes belly up and city is without significant amount of fees. Second is I'd like to get a little bit more clarification regarding modular homes or modular housing. I understand that we need to accept that and account for that. It's just that I think the terminology is a little loose. All manufactured homes are modular homes, but not all modular homes are manufactured homes. Manufactured homes are defined as homes that are designed, reviewed, and constructed under the auspices of the state of California. They come out with a state of California review stamp on it. They cannot be touched by a local jurisdiction. Modular construction can be just a simple and easy way to get around prevailing wages. You construct walls and various components off-site in a non-prevailing wage jurisdiction, ship them out to the site, and you're in. The other thing I want to see is, can we restrict where we use manufactured homes? One of the things that's making the big push, they've done them in Hayward and Emeryville and San Jose, is where you're doing 4 and 5 story, 3, 4, and 5 story manufactured homes. They're manufactured in 14 by 40 foot modules because that's the biggest thing they can ship, and they're just trucked out to the site and dropped out there, and due to the lack of diversity, they are generally considered not attractive. Now, there are reasons for doing it. They go up quickly. You don't have to deal with the cities, but I would like to kind of fine tune what it is we're looking at. Thank you.
Diana, correct me if I'm wrong, but state law requires the city to permit and issue permits on manufactured homes anywhere there's that we would allow stick-built.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're not, yeah, just leave it there.
Thank you. That's what I assumed, but realize that's what I assumed. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioner discussion on goals, policy, goal 6 or its policies or programs? Okay. Moving on to goal number 7. Scroll down. PDF page 10 of 13. Goal 7, promote access to affordable housing opportunities for persons with special housing needs, such as seniors, developmentally disabled, large households, very low to moderate income households, and first-time home buyers. Any discussion items on goal 7, policies or programs? Okay. Moving on to goal 8. Goal 8, facilitate a mix of housing types with density and height limitations appropriate for the subject neighborhood. Any discussion items on policies or programs from goal 8? Okay, Commissioner Farson.
Yeah, it's basically the comment that I made in my question earlier for 8.2a. Maybe it's just a tweaking of the language, but if the point is neighborhood context, you don't just talk to developers to get their views on how to build something when neighborhood context is the issue there. So I don't know what it is. It's developers plus citizens, but just talking to developers seems to be the opposite of the policy that we're trying to get to. Just in my humble opinion, I'm just putting that out there.
I appreciate the comment. Is Commissioner Farson's comment, is that something staff understands the direction that or the point that he's trying to make in his comment?
Definitely understand if there's any language that you think would be better, we'd be open to hearing it. But also we can take that and work with it, bring it back.
I can send you some language. Does that work?
That's great.
All right, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Commissioner Farsan. Anybody else for items related to goal 8? Okay, moving to goal 9. This is page 9 of the draft. It's PDF page 12 to 13 of the staff report. Goal 9, promote a wide variety of housing types that balance valued aspects of the existing community character, including quality, design, scale, and preservation of natural features. Anything on that policy or program? Okay, seeing none. Oh, just kidding. Commissioner Maggio.
Thank you very much. With regard to the objective standards, I know we're working through that, and I wonder if maybe the city could comment where we are at developing those objective standards and when we might see them. Is it 2026?
I'm sorry, what was 2026? The
The
end
objective
time?
standards?
Yeah,
Is that-
so can you said where are we?
Yeah, I mean, these objective design standards are going to be key in how the town is built. And 9.1A is a really important one. And so I'm just curious where we are in the process of developing those standards, and will it take us to 2026 to come up with phase 2?
I don't have an answer for you about the 2026 at this point, but the phase 2 have not been launched yet. That effort has not been launched. We're focused on getting the housing element done, understandably. And as SB 9 kind of rolled out, and understanding that applies to single family, but more and more laws pertinent to multifamily stipulate only objective standards can be applied. The conundrum that we face is that SB 9 and other statutes say absolutely develop your own objective standards, and thus developers will know precisely what those standards are, and you can evaluate proposals against those. But SB 330 passed a few years ago was retroactive and said essentially you can not adopt any new development objective standard, which would further constrain the overall envelope, building envelope. So, for instance, if the city had always relied on the process of design review to craft to take what is essentially a block of either the property lines or the setbacks and extruding that to the vertical height limit. So the city had relied always on design review to form and carve away at that block. SB 330 says you can no longer do that. You can't establish new, which would require step backs or essentially. So the statute was adopted, I think, in 2019, effective 2020, and retroactive to January of 2018. And so that is one of the challenges in adopting new development standards, objective standards, which would require perhaps upper story step backs for shadow, light, and air considerations. But we're stymied from doing that. So we have a very narrow space to work within with respect to the phase 2 objective standards at this point in time.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments or discussion for item 9? For goal 9. Okay, moving to goal 10, adopt and implement a housing element that is in compliance with state law. Any discussion items for goal 10, its policies or programs? Commissioner Heising, is that a hand?
Yeah, it was my hand and pen. So when I read policy 10.8, and I don't know if this next proposed policy would fit under goal 10 or another goal regarding employee housing, it made me think of teacher housing and how cool would it be if we were able to get teacher housing project near some of our schools to just make it affordable for teachers to actually live in La Miranda. So is that possibly a new policy we could add? Or is there some kind of I don't know, is there something that would prohibit us from adding that?
Potentially. So this actually came up in a conversation recently with Habitat for Humanity and city council members. Habitat shared that they have tried to do this, but some of the challenges are federal fair housing obligations that housing needs to be, housing needs to be made widely available and can't discriminate for folks based on employment status or marital status, those kinds of things. If a project were to be dedicated for teachers or another kind of employment group, that funding would need to be entirely privately financed. Like it couldn't qualify for tax credits or any of those things because it wouldn't be meeting those fair housing requirements.
Right. Yeah. They can do it on, if like a school district wants to build affordable housing on their site and restrict it to the teachers that work there, they can do that. But the city cannot require that, and the city can't be the, the guiding force for that work.
Got it. Okay, thank you. Good thought.
Any other commissioner comments on goal 10? Okay. So that does bring us to the end of the goals, policies, and programs. Does staff, do you feel that you have been able to capture the opinions shared?
Yes, I think we're all taking notes in 3 different places. So.
And if there's any other like minor word changes that come to mind in the, you wake up in the middle of the night and think, oh, this is the perfect encapsulation, please feel free to send them our way so we can incorporate edits.
No problem. Vice Chair Labange.
I just wanted to add on the very last page on the criteria list. For number 5, is it financially feasible? I think that if you remember my earlier comment about financially feasible, it's a little subjective. So I had just said, is it financially feasible? And this is actually, I'm leaning now towards the developer side as opposed to earlier. Is it financially feasible and competitive? I think is the question that should be asked, because it could be financially feasible, but there's a much more competitive or more financially accretive development that's going to always win because developers are motivated by profit. So if it's not competitive, it doesn't matter if it's feasible and they're not going to do it. So that's, if we're really using that as a criteria and we're not putting the lens on if people would actually do it, it doesn't really matter if it's feasible if they're not going to do it.
I mean, we should have written that more clearly to say, is it financially feasible for the city to execute that program? So like we had talked to, so when looking at these programs, we have to ask ourselves, can the city accomplish this in that 8-year cycle? Can we pay for it to get completed in that 8-year cycle? So kind of back to that 15%, 20% inclusionary housing. Would that be an overdue burden for the city? Sorry about that.
No,
Certainly.
thank you. That makes more sense.
Very well taken, though. We can definitely incorporate that into our other evaluation.
Okay. So here we're not actually making a motion. We've provided staff with some comments, some suggestions. And with that, I think we can move to the next item. Let me pull up.
We'll just, we just want to make sure that you want to continue it to the March 7th meeting. So we'll talk about it then with those.
Perfect. Perfect. So now moving to item 7, other business, ARC volunteer for February 25th. That is actually this Friday. Any takers? Okay, well, Commissioner Sturm, are you volunteering?
Yeah, I mean, I'm coaching both my kids' Odyssey of the Mind teams and the competitions on Saturday. So I don't know, it may be tough, but I haven't done it in a while. So if everybody else has conflicting meetings and stuff, I can do it.
If you have availability, then I think everyone would be thankful that you're volunteering.
Sure.
Okay. So I think that's typically at 9:30, and you'll receive an email with the link, and it's still virtual. Go back to the correct PDF here. Commissioners reports. I do have a Gpac update, but before I share that, are there any other updates people would like to report on? Okay. In Gpac last week, the 15th, we did have a couple of presentations from staff and from staff's consultants. One was regarding the draft DIR that is out, so I'm not going to talk about that too much because I do see it's on the agenda for director's report update. We did talk a little bit about the affirmatively furthering fair housing and outreach that is being conducted. Another thing that came out of our most recent Gpac meeting was an identification of like a clear need for focused meetings to go through the site inventory. So over what Sarah and Renata, I want to say we added 2 or 3 additional Gpac meetings to focus specifically on the site inventory. So there's actually one this Thursday. And for people who are interested in attending, it does start a half hour earlier than our typical meetings. Normally we start at 6. This Thursday is actually starting at 5:30. And oh gosh, when is the next one? The 3rd? I want to say March 3rd. There's going to be another supplemental meeting.
So,
am I totally off on the date, Sarah?
Nope, you're good. So it's basically every Tuesday. So it's Thursday this week, and then 3 Tuesdays after that at 6 p.m. So March
Perfect.
1st, March 8th, and March 15th.
Thank you. And we also received a new member on Gpac. One member is no longer able to be on Gpac, and we have another member who has joined, so representing the Happy Valley, Alcalanes Valley area. I think that's kind of mostly what we discussed in the last meeting. So it doesn't sound like there's any other commissioner updates. So we can move to item 9, planning director's report.
Thank you. It was touched on earlier in the meeting, and I'll just put out there for public consumption that the draft environmental impact report for the housing element update has been published. It was published last week, thus beginning the public review and comment period. Monday night, which is item B, is a reminder that we're going to have a joint session wherein the environmental consultant will present the overarching elements of the environmental review and the summary of the potentially significant impacts. And then, Sarah, is it March 7th that this body will hold a public hearing to receive public comment from members of the public? They are welcome. Public comments can be submitted in writing throughout the public comment period, but we're obligated under the law to also hold a public hearing where people can voice their comments on the draft EIR. All of the written comments and those oral comments received on the March 7 meeting will be responded to in the final EIR. So that's all I had.
And that public comment period is from the February 18th to April 4th.
Okay, thank you. And the joint meeting on the 28th, can you please remind us what time that starts?
That is from 6 to 7.
And that meeting's is the public hearing for the draft EIR, right? Not the 7th. The 7th is when.
So that is a joint meeting between Planning Commission, GPAC, and City Council, which is outlining the summary of the findings of the EIR so that everyone understands that and is on the same page, can ask questions of the consultant. And then the March 7th meeting with just Planning Commission is the public comment period for receiving comments on the document itself.
Got it. Okay.
I have has anybody had trouble opening up the CEQA report on the city site? Because I have. I don't know if there are other issues. Like, I can open up everything else except for that. The summary, everything else, and for some reason that is not opening up for me. So I just didn't know if anybody else had those issues.
It is quite a large document. We can work on potentially breaking it up if that's the issue, and or placing it somewhere else where you can access it. But please let me know if there are others who are having that issue so that we can make sure to get it up. I think I know it also is on the OPR website, the Office of Planning and Research, California website, where CEQA is also.
Got it. Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to make, because tried, and I'm fairly tech savvy, and for some reason it keeps coming up as an error message. So I don't know what the issue is. Might just be on my side.
So Commissioner Farzan, there are 6 PDFs essentially, and are you having an issue with all 6, or?
So if you go to visitlovelafayette.org/CEQA, that's where the whole report is. That will not open up. It keeps coming up as an error message. Don't worry, we can talk about this offline. Don't worry about it. That's definitely nothing to hold this meeting up.
Well, I'm also trying it as we speak. But
And what I'm finding is that's a redirect to another page on our Granicus website, which we use for all the packets.
Yeah, it's actually not redirecting. It's actually coming up as an error message. So it's something it's not communicating the right thing, but don't worry, we can talk about it offline.
Happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
okay. Back to our agenda. So planning director's report. So I think that is it. 8:55, and the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.